Hi, welcome back to Game Geeks. I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. No Brand Con 007 in 2008. We're talking about role-playing games. We had a gentleman over here who had a comment to make. So let's get the man the mic, and let's get going.
Hi, I have mostly a question as opposed to a comment. I game master and I play various games like Star Wars role-playing game and like the Marvel superheroes types games. And the one thing I've always run into that was part of a problem I had was how much reward do you give a character?
Okay.
Like characters who play regular, and my quandary is, well, I don't want to make them too powerful right away. I want to make them earn that. But then again, if they play really well, you want to give them some type of reward. So I was wondering how I'd go about doing that, make it fair and balanced.
That's a problem I've run into my entire life. I almost always end up with this huge power creep early on, like, well, they did a great job, and I like happy character. I like happy players have happy characters. Happy players make a happy game master. So here, I'll give them more experience points. And all of a sudden, I have a bunch of demigods walking around, and either nothing challenges them, or they just get squashed. And there's really, I have a really hard time finding that fine line too. There are games that help with that fairly well. As much as the CR system, the challenge rating system in D20 is interesting. I think it falls apart at higher levels, and I think it falls apart when you try to mix too many things. But I think that works. The ones I personally have the most trouble with are freeform games. Like, I'm a big Unisystem fanboy. And I always they say, an average award should be 3 to 5 experience points. Hey, Kurt, how many experience points do we get this week? 7. God, why did I do that? So that sort of thing that I usually come up with. Honestly, having too powerful characters, I'm getting a better handle on it now, and you can get it under control. Some games where you level, things are sort of built in, which you can do. You have some modularity with things like feats and skill choices and certain powers. I know in like Lone Wolf D20, you have the tiers that you can pick from. I want this power, this tier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know in a lot of other games with levels, you don't always have that level of modularity. I'm rambling. So, level powers, what do we think? What is too much in terms of character power? Anyone have any comments? How many of you are players mainly? Players mainly. Do you like potent characters, or do you like playing the little weenie guy who can't do anything? I've never liked the weenie guy.
I really strive for specialization in my characters. Like, I always try to get something that they're not good at and something that they are good at, like kind of like more of a fatal flaw. Okay. So one, I don't feel like I'm Timmy Power Gamer, and two, so I have like a more described niche in what I'm playing, I guess. Okay. Like, it's easier to roleplay too, right? When you have like some critically low stat that may not hinder your primary goal with the character, but will definitely define your character, it's a lot easier to work with that way. Like maybe a low constitution for a fighter, but a higher intelligence. So you're trying to be more tactical. Or, in Exalted, like I have really low strength, so I'm kind of a weenie in frontline combat. That defines the character, it defines the roles you take. Okay. And so if I get really powerful in one way, the DM can always slap me down and just be like, "What? Now you can't do anything for this bit." And I'm cool with that, because that's when I roll over every adversary, it's boring, right? I like to try to, if you have to think through it, that's like the draw for me, is the problem solving aspect. Okay. Like, how would my character problem solve this situation given everything on this page and everything in my head? Go. Okay.
Some of the games I really like are the games where the flaws are built into the system. Deadlands and Nominee. In particular, Deadlands, because it's inherent. Like, you have to take flaws that balance out your powers.
Which Deadlands? The original or the Savage Worlds version?
Original.
Okay.
And I really enjoyed that, because you had to build your character with flaws. And so, in that game, the inherent lacks of your character are always present. Okay. And so, yeah, I agree with the last guy, because it's really fun to have that you can't really munchkin your character, that you're required to take problems with your character. And in Nominee, you can do the same kind of thing. You can sell, you can take flaws to give yourself more points. And same kind of way, where it really focuses more on the character building rather than the character progression. And that's, again, a system thing, not necessarily a game master thing.
Okay.
Similarly, along those lines, like where Exalted has it built into its system, where you have virtues. They're a double-edged sword. They empower your character, but they also limit and define your character. So,
I was just going to mention that often enough with power level. I mean, in D&D it happens, but every game you usually gain experience. You gain more stuff you can do as you go on, right? But really, it really defines how the game is played. Like what kind of stories you can tell. What kind of, like a really early D&D game, or you're usually like fighting goblins to protect the village or something. If you're playing a World of Darkness game with regular folks, you're like figuring out how to deal with the zombies or something. Very often mundane challenges, or relatively mundane. And as you gain power, the different types of challenges, the different types of stories you can tell changes. And some games start at different places. Like a mundane World of Darkness game starts at a fairly low power level, fairly mundane. D&D has been slowly increasing where it starts as time goes on. 4th edition starting you at a fairly high power level. Exalted pushes you really high, starting you at a very, very high power level right off the bat.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of times where the people who run games get into troubles, where they start playing a game at a certain power level, and they get used to that, and how to run that, what kind of challenges they need to throw at their players. Then as they gain more power, they try to stick to that. And they're growing in power, but the challenges aren't changing enough to complement that. So instead of evolving with their characters, they get stuck, and then that discrepancy hurts the game.
Okay. Well, real quick, before we wrap for this segment and go into the next, what's our favorite genre? How many of you love fantasy above all others? Fantasy being like the typical swords and sorcery, swords and horses sort of thing. Horror, like modern horror. How many of us have a set favorite genre? Anybody? Over here, what do we got? Superhero or like pulp adventure and science fiction. All right. What about at this side? Any favorites?
Little niche that's cool, like Shadowrun. You can push the limits of your future thinking, and what if everything's wireless? What if there is no, wow, that's awesome. But then you can go back to Exalted, which is a completely different fantasy style, or you can go to D&D, and they all have their little quirks and bonuses. And
my personal favorite is urban fantasy. Modern setting, magic works, monsters, sort of urban fantasy, dark fantasy horror. It's that overlap there that makes my personal favorite. Everything from Call of Cthulhu to Witchcraft or World of Darkness, Dresden Files RPG when that comes out. All those things are sort of my favorite little thing. So, all right, good segment. We'll wrap here for now. For Game Geeks, I'm your host, Kurt Wiegel. Good day and good gaming.